On the surface, she lost everything: her marriage, her child, her reputation. But beneath the silence, she carried a secret so explosive it would burn through lies, unmask betrayal, and rebuild a life from the ashes. When the truth finally speaks, no one will be left unscathed. The sky over Seattle grayed with an indifferent hue, casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood where Leia had lived in seclusion for the past year. The silence in her modest home had become a second skin, comforting at times, suffocating at others. Each room whispered fragments of a life that no longer belonged to her. Picture frames lay face down on shelves. The front door bore the scars of a key that hadn't turned in its lock for months. She had stopped answering calls, opening mail, or even acknowledging time. Her world had narrowed down to measured breaths and carefully hidden pain. A year ago, Leia had everything, at least that's what she told herself. A charismatic husband, Victor, who smiled for the cameras as a successful political strategist. A stepdaughter, Dahlia, who once brought her wildflowers from the yard. And a life that glittered on the outside. But truth has a sharp edge. She found out she had stage 3 breast cancer, and instead of support, she was served abandonment. Victor left without a word. The woman she once helped through college, Juliana, was now flaunting Leia's husband in magazines, her name etched beside his as the new partner. And Dahlia? Silence. Not even a goodbye. Leia had crumbled alone. Hospital gowns, cold scans, and whispered prognoses became her daily companions. No one held her hand. No one sat beside her during chemotherapy. No one visited. She had cried herself empty and rose from the ashes by force, not by healing. Today marked the day she could no longer stay hidden. A letter had arrived weeks ago, one she finally dared to read last night. Her childhood home, where she had grown up with her brother Caleb, had been sold. Not by her, not by Caleb, by someone who had no right. That home held more than memories. It held secrets, things they buried after their mother's death. Things that should have never surfaced again. The sound of tires on gravel drew her to the window. A black Jeep idled by the curb, its engine softening into a hum. Leia narrowed her eyes. The door opened, and out stepped Caleb, taller than she remembered, but still with the same fierce eyes and a protective posture that hadn't dulled since they were kids. She opened the door before he knocked. For a moment, words failed them. Then Caleb pulled her into a tight embrace that made her body tense before slowly melting against his chest. "I've been looking for you for 6 months," he whispered. "Why didn't you answer my messages?" "Because I didn't know who I was anymore," she replied, voice trembling. They sat together in the living room, sunlight streaking through dust-speckled blinds. Caleb glanced around, noting the stripped-down silence of her space. "You heard about the house?" he asked. Leia nodded. "And I want it back. Not for the property. For what's inside." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You think they found it?" She shook her head slowly. "Not yet. But they will." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded with unspoken fears and half-remembered nightmares. The house where their mother died was not ordinary. It held files, documents from their father's old military investigations, evidence that had once been deemed too dangerous to surface. Their mother had hidden them, swearing Caleb and Leia to secrecy. Only 3 people knew about that lockbox: their mother, Leia, and Caleb, and now the house was gone. Later that evening, as the city dipped into a bluish twilight, Caleb revealed a folder he had brought. Inside were clippings, photos of Victor and Juliana attending political galas, a real estate record showing their purchase of the family home, and a file titled Operation Echo. Leia's hands trembled as she traced the red stamped lettering. This wasn't supposed to exist anymore, she murmured. Caleb met her eyes. "Someone's making it exist again, and they're using your pain to hide it." As the first raindrops tapped against the window, a name at the bottom of the document sent a chill down Leia's spine. Zane Caldwell, once a childhood friend of Caleb's, now a private investigator with ties to political scandals, and someone who had gone missing 2 years ago under mysterious circumstances. "He's alive?" Leia whispered. Caleb nodded. "And he's reaching out, but not to me, to you." Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, The shadows of the past began to stretch again. The morning after the hospital confrontation, Leia sat by her window, staring out at the mist curling through the trees that bordered her small apartment complex. The bruises of yesterday still lingered not on her skin, but in the heart that had barely begun to mend. Caleb had stayed the night on the couch, refusing to leave her alone. It was strange, comforting, and jarring all at once. Having her brother back in her life brought warmth, but also a flood of memories she had tried to drown. Caleb, now clean-shaven and dressed in dark jeans and a buttoned shirt, brewed coffee in the kitchenette. He looked like he hadn't slept, his eyes shadowed and sharp. "You should eat something," he said as he placed a plate of toast on the table. Leia didn't answer. She turned to him slowly. "Why now? Why come back after all these years?" He leaned against the counter, folding his arms. "Because I heard about the cancer, and then I saw that interview. Victor was parading around with his new wife like the past never existed. You deserved better, and I needed to know you were still you." "I'm not," she said simply. "Not after what he did." He nodded. "Then let's find out why he did it." That day, Caleb took Leia to meet someone he claimed could open doors. Zane. They met at a small bookstore tucked away between two abandoned buildings downtown. Zane was tall, lean, and moved like a shadow. He had the kind of face that made you forget you'd seen it. "You're the girl in the hospital video," Zane said, looking at Leia with unflinching curiosity. "You want answers?" Leia nodded. Zane handed her a manila folder. "Victor didn't just betray you emotionally. There are layers to this. Financial documents, forged medical records, and a buried investment in a pharmaceutical company, Metapure." She flipped open the file. Her medical chart stared back at her, but something was off. "According to these records, she'd been in remission for months, but my doctor said your doctor works for a private medical firm. One was recently acquired by Metapure's holding group. Guess who sits on that board now?" "Victor," Caleb growled. Zane nodded. "Cancer became a smokescreen. Something's being tested, and you were part of it." Leia staggered backward, slumping into a leather chair. "So the cancer was never real?" "No," Zane said softly. "It was real, but it may have been prolonged or manipulated." The room spun. Caleb clenched his fists, pacing like a wolf denied a kill. Leia whispered, "Why me?" Zane hesitated. "Because of your bloodline, your mother's side. I dug into your family history. There's a genetic marker linked to rare immunity traits markers that could make or break drug trials. They needed you sick, and they needed you to comply." Later that evening, Leia sat with Caleb under the low lights of the apartment. The folder lay on the table, now joined by a flash drive. Zane had warned them this information, if exposed recklessly, could destroy lives. But Leia wasn't afraid anymore. "Do you think she knew?" Leia asked. "Who?" "Juliana." Caleb nodded slowly. "She's smarter than she looks. She married Victor within weeks of your divorce. That wasn't a coincidence. She was in on it." Leia clenched her teeth. "Then we start there, with her." The next day, they traveled to a private gallery, where Juliana was hosting a charity exhibit. Leia entered alone, dressed in a red silk dress and a scarf that hid the pale line across her collarbone. She glided across the marble floor like a ghost reborn. Juliana stood in the center, radiant and smug, surrounded by admirers. When their eyes met, something flickered behind Juliana's perfectly curated poise. "Leia," she said, voice sugar-dipped venom. "I almost didn't recognize you. You look, well, better than I did in the hospital, right?" A hush fell over the nearby crowd. Juliana laughed tightly. "Still dramatic, I see. I'm here for answers," Leia said. "You know what you did." Juliana's smile faltered for just a second. "What do you think you know?" "I know about Metapure. I know about the doctor. I know about the trial drugs. And I know you signed the insurance waivers." Juliana stepped closer, her eyes dark. "You think anyone will believe you? Victor is untouchable. You're a discarded chapter. I'm the headline now. You're the cover-up," Leia hissed. "And I'm the storm that's coming." The moment cracked like thunder. Juliana's lips curled. "Then I hope you're ready to drown." As Leia turned and walked away, the guests murmuring behind her, She felt the heat of every gaze. But something inside her had shifted. No longer the abandoned wife, she was the fire beneath the ash. That night, back in the apartment, Leia opened a second file from Zane. Inside was a photograph of Victor, standing with a man in a lab coat. The timestamp was dated 3 months before her diagnosis. They were planning it, she said, tears burning her eyes. Before I even got sick, Caleb put a hand on her shoulder. And we're going to end it. A knock on the door startled them both. Caleb approached, gun hidden in his waistband. When he opened it, a young woman stood there, trembling. I'm Dahlia, she said, Victor's daughter, and I need your help. I think they're watching me too. The world tilted again. A new piece in the puzzle, one they hadn't even seen coming. The morning sun cast long, fractured shadows across the cracked pavement as Caleb sat in his car outside a weather-worn building on the edge of the city. A file lay open on the passenger seat, its contents fanned out like the wings of a fallen bird. Legal records, forged hospital forms, surveillance shots, and a single photo of Victor shaking hands with a man Caleb recognized from years ago. His instincts twisted inside him. This wasn't just betrayal. It was systemic. Organized, inside the building, Zane paced the floor of his small office, its walls cluttered with case files and cork boards scribbled with red string connections. He hadn't slept in nearly 30 hours, but sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. His history with Victor ran deeper than business, deeper than betrayal. He once called the man a friend. Now, he viewed him as a parasite, clever, calculating, and dangerous. Leia, meanwhile, had begun therapy sessions at a discreet private center arranged by Caleb. She hadn't spoken much in the first few visits, just sat silently in a white room with too much light. But by the third session, words came, painful, slow, but authentic. Her voice shook when she spoke of Dahlia, of being thrown out like a used paper, of the hospital nights where nurses whispered about the man who never visited. Caleb had been watching Victor's public movements, his charity events, his boardroom appearances, his staged family outings with Juliana and Dahlia. But behind the curated perfection was something darker. Zane discovered Victor had used offshore accounts to pay hush money to multiple parties, including a corrupt oncologist who had deliberately delayed Leia's cancer treatment, citing falsified charts. The depth of the conspiracy was sickening. One evening, Leia stood in front of a long mirror in her apartment. For the first time, she let her hand rest on her scars. Not with disgust, not with grief, but with recognition. Her body had carried her through a war, and she had survived. She was not broken. She was becoming. The romance between her and Zane bloomed gently, like wildflowers in a battlefield. Not out of neediness, but mutual understanding. Zane had suffered a loss. His younger sister had died of malpractice when Victor's medical subsidiary had covered it up to protect a major investor. Zane had vowed never to let such evil fester unchecked again. One night, after dinner, Zane and Leia shared a moment on the balcony overlooking the city skyline. You're not alone anymore, he said quietly, touching her hand. And you're not invisible. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to look at the stars. No, she whispered. I'm starting to believe that. Meanwhile, Dahlia was starting to ask questions. She stumbled upon old photos of her mother and Leia, confused why someone who looked so much like her had been erased from her life. Juliana grew more hostile, nervous that Dahlia's curiosity would unravel years of lies. Caleb, following new leads, uncovered a witness, an old nurse named Asm who had left the country years ago, terrified of what she'd seen. With difficulty, he convinced her to return under protection. Her testimony would be explosive. Juliana had bribed hospital staff, faked records, and Victor had signed off on it. As the court date neared, Caleb received a cryptic warning. A note slid under his door. Stop digging or she disappears again. For good. But this time, they were ready. Zane installed surveillance. Caleb traced the source of the threat to a shell corporation tied to Victor's real estate firm. And Leia, she didn't flinch. She showed up in court, head held high. In court, as the evidence mounted, Victor's polished facade began to crack. Dahlia was present, confused and teary-eyed, watching her father fall apart. Then came the moment no one expected. From the back of the courtroom, a frail woman entered, escorted by security. As the courtroom was silenced as she took the stand, and the truth began to pour. But just as the judge motioned for a recess and the room erupted in murmurs, Zane's phone buzzed. A message. No number. You've missed a real game. Look closer. Victor was just the beginning. He froze in the shadows of justice. Something even darker was waiting. The day of reckoning arrived, draped in a false calm. Leia stood before the courthouse in a tailored navy coat, Caleb beside her, his hand firm on her shoulder. The media swarmed, cameras clicked, but she had long shed her fear of flashbulbs. Her truth, buried for a decade, was about to scorch the lies built atop it. Inside the courtroom, Victor sat with false ease. Dahlia, poised and confused, looked between her father and Leia. Juliana, ever the composed predator, whispered into her lawyer's ear. Leia's legal team submitted their final evidence: private investigations, voice recordings, medical reports showing fabricated documents tied to Juliana's clinic, and the testimony of Zane, now sitting in the witness box. Zane's voice didn't waver. He spoke of the clinic's forged diagnostic scans. He named the shell company that had siphoned Victor's wealth under Juliana's name. He revealed the offshore accounts and the identity manipulation scheme orchestrated not just by Juliana, but by Victor too. The courtroom murmured as Zane paused and added, "It wasn't just betrayal, it was a conspiracy, fraud, emotional torture." Leia looked at Victor. His smirk had faded. Dahlia stared at him with tears in her eyes. The judge recessed for an hour before delivering the verdict. In that quiet space, Leia stepped outside and found Dahlia alone by the pillars. The girl's mascara ran down her cheeks. "He told me you walked away," she said. "But you didn't. Did you?" Leia shook her head, unable to speak. "He lied to me. My whole life." Caleb approached silently and placed his arm around Leia. Dahlia didn't resist when Leia hugged her for the first time in years. The judge returned and delivered a stunning verdict. Full custody of Dahlia was granted to Leia. Victor and Juliana were sentenced to years in prison for fraud and criminal conspiracy. Their public empire shattered. Outside, the world erupted. Headlines screamed betrayal, conspiracy, and redemption. But in the middle of it all, Leia walked away not with vengeance, but peace. Months later, Leia and Dahlia lived in a sunlit apartment overlooking the harbor. Caleb visited every Sunday. Zane remained in touch, though from a distance. His world, one of secrets, hers of healing. One morning, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a photo from 10 years ago, the day Victor left her. On the back, a single line was scribbled. "You were always stronger than any of us." Leia smiled softly. She turned toward the kitchen, where Dahlia was laughing at Caleb's bad cooking. The sun rose higher through the window, chasing every last shadow from her home. The forgotten truth had been remembered, and she, reborn from ruin, was finally free. Moral and life lesson: truth may be buried, but it never dies. No matter how deeply lies and manipulations cover the truth, it finds a way to resurface. Leia's journey teaches us that resilience and patience can eventually uncover justice, even after years of silence.